This New Yorker podcast is supported by Indeed.com, used by over 3 million businesses for hiring, where business owners and HR professionals can post job openings with screener questions, then sort, review, and communicate with candidates from an online dashboard. Learn more at Indeed.com/hire.
This is The Political Scene, a weekly conversation with New Yorker writers and editors about politics. It's Friday, April 13th. I'm Dorothy Wickenden, executive editor of The New Yorker. 7 years into the war in Syria, President Bashar al-Assad is capturing the last rebel strongholds. Part of this offensive took place on Saturday in Douma, a suburb of Damascus, where civilians suffered hundreds of casualties in a suspected chemical weapons attack by the government. At an Emergency Security Council meeting at the UN, Nikki Haley, the American ambassador, blamed Russia for much of the humanitarian crisis.
We must not overlook Russia and Iran's roles in enabling the Assad regime's murderous destruction. Russia and Iran have military advisors at Assad's airfields and operation centers. Russian officials are on the ground helping direct the regime's Starve and Surrender campaign, and Iranian allied forces do much of the dirty work. When the Syrian military pummels civilians, they rely on the military hardware given by Russia. Russia could stop this senseless slaughter if it wanted, but it stands with the Assad regime and supports without any hesitation.
This morning, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, claimed that the evident chemical weapons attack was staged with assistance from an unnamed foreign secret service. Robin Wright joins me to discuss the showdown over Syria and how it will shape the politics in the region. Robin, welcome.
Great to be with you, as always, Dorothy.
Let's begin with where the war stands right now. It has claimed about 500,000 lives and displaced 13 million people. Assad's regime is perpetrating the worst war crimes in a generation. And because of that, the war appears to be essentially over. Can you give us just a very quick overview?
Sure. And remember, when you talk about that 13 million people, that's more than half of the Syrian population. So that you have extraordinary number of deaths, and then add those injuries and displacements, the refugees. More than a quarter of the Syrian population has left the country altogether and is being absorbed at a tremendous cost by neighboring countries and threatening to destabilize or challenge those countries economically as well. But when it comes to the war, the Syrian regime over the past year has knitted together different patches of territory across the country. So it now controls the vast majority of space on the ground, including all of the major cities. In effect, Assad now has re-exerted his control over the majority of Syria. But to reclaim these last areas, he has apparently been willing to use chemical weapons in violation of every international law to terrorize civilians on the ground and force rebels who fought against extraordinary odds to surrender and move to other parts, to engage in some kind of agreement and to move to other parts of Syria or die.
So last April, a year ago, Trump ordered an airstrike on a Syrian airfield after reports that Assad had used nerve agents on civilians. But that had no effect as a deterrent. There have been at least 6 more poisonous gas attacks this year. So Trump's initial response this time was to threaten Russia and Iran and promise immediate action. On Wednesday, he tweeted that Russia should get ready for missiles. But then Secretary Mattis stepped in. Walk us through the week so far.
Well, the week saw some real moments of high drama, with the president tweeting that the U.S. would be acting within 24 or 48 hours and warning the Syrians and the Russians, their sponsors, that there would be smart new weapons used against the regime. So there were great expectations in the early part of the week of an imminent airstrike. But as it gradually unfolded, it appears that there are differences on a number of different levels. One is within the administration itself. What kind of targets do they focus on? As you pointed out last year, they hit an airfield from where Syrian planes had flown to drop chemical weapons. And the message was to say, don't do that again. And they did. The question is, what do you do this time to make sure that Syria really gets the message and that you do something bigger, bolder, with more impact? And so the Secretary Mattis at the Pentagon has been urging that the U.S. and its allies, if they strike, to go after things that will not jeopardize a wider war, whether it's places where you might have Russian troops or Iranian troops or Hezbollah troops, that this needs to send a message to the regime itself, which was the agent of the use of chemical weapons. There are other, kind of logistical questions. What kind of strike do you engage in? Is this something that you need wider power, whether it's ships or aircraft in the region, in the event that Russia follows through and says we'll not only counter any airstrikes on Syria, we'll go after the targets from where they came. So suddenly the issue of chemical weapons almost moves to the back burner in the wider potential of what this conflict or what this retaliation could become.
This New Yorker podcast is supported by Indeed.com. When you're hiring, you don't want to waste time sorting through dozens of irrelevant resumes. You want an efficient way to get a short list of qualified candidates. That's why you need Indeed.com. Post a job in minutes, set up screener questions based on your job requirements, then zero in on qualified candidates using an intuitive online dashboard. Discover why 3 million businesses use Indeed for hiring. Post a job today at Indeed.com/hire. Search for greatness, search Indeed. This New Yorker podcast is supported by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Chances are you're confident when it comes to your work, your hobbies, and your life. Rocket Mortgage gives you that same level of confidence when it comes to buying a home or refinancing your existing home loan. Rocket Mortgage is simple, allowing you to fully understand all the details and be confident you're getting the right mortgage for you. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/political scene. Equal housing lender licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030.
This week on the New Yorker Radio Hour, a trans woman has her face surgically reconstructed so that people see her the way she sees herself.
My motivations aren't cosmetic. One of the ways that the world chiefly interacts with you is by your face, right? Is by looking at you.
That's the New Yorker Radio Hour from WNYC Studios. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your shows.
Let's go back for a second, because Russia's involvement in this crisis has been, of course, pivotal right from the beginning. Trump has repeatedly lambasted Obama for failing to act in 2013 after the Syrian government crossed the red line by using chemical weapons. That attack resulted in an agreement between Russia and the U.S. that called for Syria's chemical weapons to be destroyed. What went wrong there?
Well, you had a couple of things. Remember that President Obama decided that he needed congressional authorization to use military force. What the U.S. has been doing across the region is still based on that military authorization from Congress that dates back to the 9/11 attacks 17 years ago. And he wanted to make sure that if we engaged in something that was wider or led to something wider, that the Congress was on board. And it was the Republicans at the time that blocked it and said that they would not vote for an authorization. And so President Obama decided not to act. So in the absence of military authorization, the United States worked with Russia to try to convince Assad to agree to give up all of his chemical weapons. And technically, he was supposed to have done just that. And there was international monitors who went in and helped get rid of a stockpile. The fact is that Assad lied, not to many people's surprise, but he either had his scientists make a new lot or he hid some chemical weapons that he didn't hand over to the international monitors. And so we're back to where we were. And since 2013, he has repeatedly used chemical weapons again, sometimes in small enough doses that it hasn't produced an international reaction, or it's been hard to prove because they're in areas beyond the range of monitors or international observers to go in.
Yeah, and chemical weapons are war crimes, and it's just worth emphasizing this again. This morning I saw that Kenneth Roth, the head of Human Rights Watch, says that Putin really potentially shares criminal responsibility here and that there have to be other measures taken in concert with our allies to put pressure on Putin. And it is interesting that the administration is suddenly welcoming the participation of France and Great Britain in coming up with some kind of unified response.
This will be the third kind of confrontation with the Russians in recent months. The kind of sanctions on Russia for meddling in the U.S. elections, for meddling in Crimea. There is this growing tension, and Syria represents something where you're seeing what's becoming a new Cold War, almost evolving into what could become a hotter war.
Well, and all of this is complicated by Trump's legal problems with the Mueller investigation. And this is the first time he's really come out and criticized Putin quite strenuously.
The criticism of Vladimir Putin, the very specificity, the personal side of it, has been quite striking. That he, in tweets, chastised Putin for support of what he called the animal, the bad actor, Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Just a few months ago, even a few weeks ago, the president had indicated a willingness to keep trying to push the reset button with Russia to try to better relations. And now we're getting into a point where it looks like we will be confronting each other over our rival interests in a country that is really important. I mean, people forget that Syria is the geostrategic center of the Middle East. It borders 5 countries that are very important U.S. allies: Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, and Lebanon. And whatever happens in Syria spills over onto all of them. We've seen this throughout the Arab-Israeli conflict. And the United States has not wanted to get involved in the civil war. But because Syria is so important, suddenly we're back into a war we've tried to stay out of for a very long time.
As Haley noted, the problem here isn't just Russia, it's Iran, too. And John Bolton, the new national security advisor, who just started his job on Monday, has called in the past for regime change in Iran. What do you think he's advising Trump on Syria, Russia, and Iran?
John Bolton is the loudest voice inside the administration in challenging Iran. There's a lot at stake with Iran. The issue of the 2015 nuclear deal, one of the most important non-proliferation treaties in a quarter century, is up for grabs. The United States has been deeply concerned about Iran's intervention in Syria, the role it's played in Iraq, what it's doing in Yemen, the kind of challenges to some of our U.S. allies, including Israel and Saudi Arabia.
And Israel is truly alarmed at how Hezbollah and other Iranian-backed forces control dozens of Syrian military bases.
Absolutely. There are at least 36 places, not counting frontline positions, where Iran and its allies have quasi-permanent positions, whether it's air bases, military headquarters, nodes for drone control, command and control centers. And Israel has been increasingly concerned that Iran is not there just to back up Bashar Assad in his civil war, but to embed long-term. And so that you have a replication of the situation you have in Lebanon along the Israeli border, now in Syria as well, with the danger that there will be missiles pointed at Israel. So Israel has launched kind of a quiet war, little noticed by the outside world, over 100 airstrikes in recent years, and escalating recently, in part because of the fear that this could that Iran is there even after the civil war ends.
And amid all this chaos came the confirmation hearing yesterday from Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. He's another hawk, and not least on Russia, although he did say yesterday that he'd prefer achieving the administration's foreign policy goals with, as he put it, unrelenting diplomacy rather than sending young men and women to war. Assuming he's confirmed, what do you make of that pledge?
Well, I think the dynamics within the national security apparatus changed dramatically. You have both Bolton and Pompeo who have called for regime change in Iran and have suggested regime change in North Korea, which means that they're willing to go much further than their predecessors in confronting these governments if the United States doesn't get everything it wants at the negotiating table, whether it's fixing the Iran deal or getting complete agreement to swiftly denuclearize the Korean Peninsula.
The other looming issue, as you just noted briefly, is North Korea. How is the Syrian crisis likely to affect the diplomatic talks that are supposed to go forward next month or soon with North Korea?
Well, the interesting part of the Syrian crisis is the timing. And this is a moment, if President Trump opts to use military force, that it sends a message not just to the Syrians and to others in the Middle East, but well beyond that. And it signals to Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, that the U.S. is willing to use military might if diplomacy doesn't get what he wants. And so this is an important message just about how far his administration is willing to go to achieve its goals.
Thanks so much, Robin. We'll have you back soon.
Thanks, Dorothy.
Robin Wright is a contributing writer for The New Yorker and the author of Rock the Kasbah, Rage and Rebellion Across the Islamic World. This has been The Political Scene from The New Yorker. You can subscribe to this and other New Yorker podcasts by searching for The New Yorker in your podcast app and find more political analysis and commentary on NewYorker.com. Feel free to rate and review The Political Scene on Apple Podcasts. This podcast is produced by Alex Barron and Hannah Walentz for NewYorker.com. I'm Dorothy Wickenden.
This New Yorker podcast is supported by Indeed.com. When you're hiring, you don't want to waste time sorting through dozens of irrelevant resumes. You want an efficient way to get a short list of qualified candidates. That's why you need Indeed.com. Post a job in minutes, set up screener questions based on your job requirements, then zero in on qualified candidates using an intuitive online dashboard. Discover why 3 million businesses use Indeed for hiring. Post a job today at Indeed.com/hire. Search for greatness. Search Indeed.